Hi there, my name is Sean McGeever, and I am going to be going through one of the Talk Tuesdays for Mark chapter 6, as we just keep plugging away here in the home stretch of all the Talk Tuesdays. For Mark chapter 6, there's a bunch of great stories. Probably two stand out as good ones for Club Talks. One would be the feeding of the 5,000, and the other one would be when Jesus walks on water. Now, for the feeding of the 5,000 story, I might do that one, except that in Mark chapter 8, we're in my club, I think we're planning on doing the feeding of the 4,000. And so rather than all these feeding stories, I think I'm actually going to save our that kind of a story for our next Club Talk. So with that in mind, I'm going to encourage my friend Angel, who's doing the Club Talk in our club, actually in 2 weeks, because next Monday's there's no school, to do the Jesus Walks on Water story, or account if you prefer. And so that's good. Now, when it comes to that story, the Jesus Walks on Water account, I've already done a Talk Tuesday on that because that same story happens in John 6. So in my little notes or whatever, I will link to Talk Tuesday for John 6, and you can see what I say there. So for just a couple moments, I wanted to let you know what I saw in what Mark's account of the story. And even though Mark is the shortest gospel and John is the longest, Mark actually goes on with more detail than John does about this story about Jesus walking on water. So I'm going to highlight a couple points about additional details and insight that Mark brings to this that you might not get in the John chapter 6 Talk Tuesday or just kind of reading it. And so here are a couple. First off, in verse 48, Mark gives this great little phrase that when they were out, it says, when Jesus saw that they were making headway painfully, for the wind was against them. And I mean, so this is just a historical, like, kind of anecdote. Oh, the wind was against them. That's what Mark's pointing out. Well, I think we don't want to go too far with it, but we can also use this as a bit of a metaphor for when we feel like we're going, something's just fighting against us. We do learn from John's account in John 6:19 that they had been rowing. The disciples have been rowing for 3.5 miles. So just imagine 3.5 miles of rowing against the wind. And I think this is an experience that a lot of people feel like things just keep coming at them. Difficulties, challenges, like rowing against the wind, going nowhere, though you're trying so much. I think that is a really vivid illustration just from the wording there in Mark. So whether it's, family or friends or school or just personal things, sometimes it feels like you're working so hard to make progress and you can't. And this is how they felt. So it's a great little phrase there. Also, just a little bit in verse 48 also mentions the fourth watch of the night. And so we know, technically speaking, that this is 3 a.m. But what I thought it was really interesting as I was reading up on this, one commentator called the fourth watch of the night as the darkest hour of the night. And maybe there's something there that, the fourth hour of the night, or the fourth watch of the night, is just kind of the darkest time or the darkest place that we could be. And I think that's another phrase that we might be able to say, like when it's really, really dark and you can't see anything. Then in verse 49, it talks about what they thought they saw was a ghost, or technically in the Greek it would be like a phantasm, but basically just something that they can't quite understand with their eyes. And here's some significance of that word or phrase, which is, I think it's actually kind of really sad that they did not recognize that this was Jesus. Now, they recognized it was something or someone, but they didn't recognize it was Jesus, despite spending all of their time with him, 24 hours a day for a really long time. And that we can actually kind of be in the same situation where maybe we keep coming to club and we keep hearing about Jesus. This is what my last Talk Tuesday was about. Or being around Jesus, whether we're are a Christian or have gone to church, or maybe have come to Young Life a couple of times. But God is around, but we don't treat him like God. We almost kind of treat him like he's a ghost, and don't recognize him. More of a ghost than a God. And so God is real and wants to be active, and we want to recognize him, and yet some of us just kind of like let him pass by. Anyway, there's that. In verse 51, Mark points out that Jesus got into the boat, and what we know from that point in the story in verse 51 is right before that, the disciples are terrified. Jesus' best friends are terrified Yet Jesus still got into the boat. And so even if we feel terrified about what Jesus might do in our lives, maybe for the first time, I don't know what it looks like to have God come into my life, or maybe for the millionth time, God, I'm kind of keeping you distant. I'm keeping you at arm's reach. Even in the midst of being terrified, overwhelmed, nervous, Jesus got into the boat. He wants to join us. So that could be kind of a response if you're doing this talk about, if Jesus was to come into your life, into your boat, more into your situation, into your daily life, what would your response be? Also, just verse 51, it says that the wind ceased. They should have been familiar with something like this, because in Mark chapter 4, so just 2 chapters ago, in verse 39, Jesus calmed the wind and the waves. This for us will be the club talk we had just done, and so this should have been familiar to them, and yet still they're a bit overwhelmed, and the pieces don't fall into place. In verse 51, it also uses the word astounded. They were astounded, and this is an interesting word. It does kind of just mean like amazed or overwhelmed, but actually the technical idea behind the word is that they were amazed beyond what makes sense to them. Like they go, this doesn't make sense. And in doing so, this word actually has to do with a change of place, or being removed from where you are, almost about thinking about how who you are or what it is. In other words, Jesus' actions actually kind of like changed who they are in a certain way. And that's what it means when they were astounded. And then the last bit, and all these notes I'll have and we'll download if you want it, was that at the end, it's a bit odd. John doesn't include this, but Mark does. It says, for they did not understand about the loaves, but their hearts were hardened. I mean, why is it going back to the loaves? Of all things, maybe it should go back to that they didn't remember from Mark 4 when Jesus calmed the wind and the waves. Well, why is it bringing up the loaves? Why is it bringing up all this stuff? The main point is that they did not remember the miracles that Jesus had done. And I think that this is a great call for all of us, which is, what if God does answer our prayers or our requests to do a miracle, which I think we can pray for, and I think that God does miracles. But what is the purpose of it? The purpose is that so we actually continue to put our faith in Him. Not that God has to continually be doing all these miracles for us to trust Him just one day at a time. I think it's okay to ask for those things, but let's put our trust in what God has already done. We already have these accounts in the Bible. We already know that He died and resurrected from the dead. If we ask around, or maybe even look at our own lives, I'm sure we could recognize powerful things that God has done. And while it is encouraging to have continual things that happen, that we can keep trusting God, right here, he's condemning them a bit for saying, don't you know what I've already done? Why is it that I have to keep doing things? And that really kind of challenging the nature of our faith, not so that kind of God becomes our problem solver, but that we can really put our trust in the person of Jesus Christ and put our trust fully in God. So anyway, that's it. Just a couple things maybe to add onto my Talk Tuesday from John 6. So I hope that's helpful, and I hope that your club talks go really great. All right, talk to you later.